Hello, everybody. You've tuned in to the Indiana State Police Roadshow. I'm your host, First Sergeant Rich Myers with the Indiana State Police Public Information Office. I want to thank the Indiana State Police Alliance and Cops for Kids for their continued support of the Indiana State Police Roadshow. And I want to thank Tom Trial, who's behind the scenes and puts us on the Indiana State Police YouTube site each and every week. And you can get to that site by our Indiana State Police homepage and just click on the YouTube link at the bottom. I have with me again this week Captain Dave Burston with the Indiana State Police Public Information Office. Dave, thanks for coming in. Appreciate you being here.
I'm glad that you put this show together, Rich. Thanks for having me.
This is a very good show, very informative show, very timely show, I think. We have the prosecutor from the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, Prosecutor Terry Curry. Thank you for being here today.
Sure. Good morning.
Appreciate you being here with us. And what we're talking about is something that's kind of in the news, and it's very, very timely, and it's about police cameras. And I think we're going to be talking mainly about body cameras, but for some time we've had in-car cameras out there and around. But Prosecutor Curry, what's a responsibility of a prosecutor's office if a police action shooting or police incident is taking place and a body camera is involved with that?
Anytime there is a death of a person at the hands of another, that's a homicide in the general sense of the term homicide. It doesn't mean it's a crime. And as a consequence, obviously here in Marion County, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department Homicide Unit would investigate the circumstances of that death. And that's true in any situation, including a police action shooting, which obviously, unfortunately, we've had several in the course of the last 5 years. And so the procedure would be and is that as IMPD conducts its investigation, they will confer with our office. Usually they will provide us with their initial investigation. It's frequently the case that we'll ask for additional investigation into the matter. And it's not unusual in that situation that we receive video. Now, obviously, IMPD is not outfitted with body cams and not consistently with onboard cameras in their vehicles. But no matter whether it was a body cam or say a security video, which is the case in the most recent police action shooting that happened at 10th and Rural, those materials will be turned over to our office. And until we then complete the investigation and a determination is made, and our role is simply to determine whether a crime has occurred.
Right.
Until that happens, then we will not release any information related to that investigation, including the contents of any video, whether it be a body cam or as I said, security video.
So you, as a prosecutor, it's your responsibility to decide whether that can be released or not.
Correct. And in the first instance, there's, as I've discussed in the past, most recently, there's at least 3 considerations why we would not release a video. First and foremost is they simply cannot. Attorneys are bound by the rules of professional conduct. There are specific rules pertaining to a prosecutor. And as it pertains to a video or information about an investigation, any attorney cannot release any information related to an investigation or litigation that is not in the public record. And the reason for that rule should be pretty obvious, and that is we should not be allowed to put information out to the public that perhaps prejudice someone who either is under investigation or has a pending case against them. And so we are specifically precluded by the rules of professional conduct from releasing any information, which would include a video. Now, a quick aside there is one explicit exception, and that is that if it is a matter of trying to identify a suspect,
right,
then that is an exception that it would allow the police agency, our office, to release that video to public to see if anyone can help identify someone who's otherwise not been identified as a suspect in a crime.
Kind of a public safety. If the public is at risk,
right,
you could release that then.
So first and foremost, we are specifically precluded from releasing that information. Secondly, even without regard to those ethical considerations, we would not, and a very competent police agency and investigator would not release information to the public because they do not want to taint any information that then is provided in the course of the investigation. We want, and our detectives obviously want, to be assured that if someone is coming forward with information about a crime or an incident, it's based upon firsthand knowledge and not based upon something they saw on TV or something they read in the press. And the third consideration is that as it relates to a video, is frequently that is incomplete information.
Right.
And so to solely release a video, whether it be a body cam, security video, could frequently present an incomplete picture of what transpired and even an inaccurate. And so for all those reasons, we would not allow, and I guess going back to the original reason in terms of our obligation under the rules of professional conduct, as a prosecutor, not only are we precluded from doing so, the rules require that I make reasonable efforts to make sure the police agencies do not do that as well.
So would this be the same standard with any investigation, or are you just talking any homicidal investigation?
That would be true of any investigation. And the example I've given most recently to talk about as to why we would not release any information prematurely is the Richmond Hill explosion. In the month and a half that was under investigation, we were constantly asked, well, do you have suspects? Do you have a theory about how the explosion occurred? Well, of course we did. Of course we had suspects.
Yeah.
Of course the investigators pretty sure they knew how the explosion occurred. But if we put that information out there, then any individual who came forward with information after that fact about those individuals or about how the explosion occurred, that evidence would have been tainted by the possibility that they really just learned it from the press.
Yes, Dave.
And another example, and with the Richmond Hill, I look back to my own personal experience with the Jill Bierman homicide out of Bloomington. Unsolved homicide for 5 years. Her body is then discovered. There had been so much information put out about that investigation that was available on the internet that we were getting lots of calls of, I know such and such. And as we looked back on it, this is information they retrieved from doing their own research on the internet. We chased down a bunch of false leads. The one thing that we did know, and I'm not even going to discuss it now, it's been made public, but we did determine how Jill Bierman died. Mm-hmm. And that was very closely guarded. And somehow it got out to one particular media. And that media was going to publicize that information. We as law enforcement had to go above that reporter to the media outlet and explain to them crystal clear that if you publicly put this out, you will likely condemn this investigation to being ended, and we will never be able to bring to justice the person responsible. Thank goodness cooler heads prevailed. They did not publicly release that information, and that news outlet put a gag order on their own reporter, who was really only looking out for their own personal interest to try and advance their career. And I'm happy to say that person is no longer in this market.
And the reason for that would be, obviously, is there's only one person or persons that would know how that person died.
Usually when on a murder investigation, who knows how the murder occurred? The person who did it and whoever they tell.
Yeah.
And that's who we want to get the tip from, somebody that has that kind of near firsthand information.
Are there other states or other cities that vary from our laws and maybe that's why our reporters or our media is looking at that and saying, how come we can't get this?
It would appear so. And going back to the issue of police action shootings, here in Indiana, we can charge a person with a crime by one of two ways. 99% of the time, it's done by what's called a probable cause affidavit and corresponding criminal information, which is then approved by a judge. But also, we can do so by presenting a case to a grand jury, which will return an indictment or
right.
decline to return an indictment. And in Indiana, if a matter goes to the grand jury, then by law, that proceeding is secret and confidential. And the example, and it wasn't exactly the video, but in the Ferguson Missouri situation, after that grand jury declined to return an indictment, that prosecutor stood in front of the national press and recited everything that was presented to the grand jury. Clearly, in the state of Indiana, we couldn't do that, and so yes, it would appear that there are different considerations, perhaps different rules and statutes that apply in other states that allow that, but there's absolutely no question what the rules provide here in Indiana.
Dave, kind of going to you, I know we've heard the media talk about and the public, how come every police officer doesn't have a camera? They're not that expensive.
That's an interesting point when we look at it, and technology is constantly evolving, but where we stand now, there are really two issues. While storage costs are going down, they're still exceedingly high. And if you think about an agency the size of IMPD, or I'll speak to the state police where we have 1,200 officers, and you have 1,200 body cams, and you're going to say, we want that body cam running from the time that officer starts their shift to when they finish it, because we don't trust the police and we think you'll just keep it turned off during contacts with citizens that could be questionable. So now we have 8 hours a day times 1,200 times 365.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that get stored? Well, we'll store it in the cloud. The cloud isn't free. That takes money. And in today's dollars, it takes hundreds of thousands of dollars on into millions, depending upon how many gigabytes of information or terabytes that are going to be stored. So that's one factor. Then the equipment itself. Granted, it's not expensive, but it's constantly evolving. So you're replacing that equipment. For state police, we found for our type of policing that we do, we like the in-car video.
Right.
We've been using in-car videos. We don't have them in every car, but we have them in a number of our vehicles, and we've done that since the late 1980s. That fits the model more, that when the emergency lights are turned on, that camera comes on, the officer's mic comes on, everything is recorded. The other aspect of just the besides the cost and the changing of the technology, you cannot capture everything. You get that one look. For example, what you're seeing now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can't see that there are two people sitting behind me. Mm-hmm. They're off camera. What's happening there? There's so much that is not captured from a perspective of camera. There was a recent case where it showed the officer looked like they were wrestling and beating a person up as they were putting handcuffs on them, and they were accused of using excessive force. They did have a body camera, an in-car camera, and prior to that, you see where the suspect hauled off and punched the police officer. Well, you don't punch a police officer and not expect that officer's not going to try to arrest you. And it comes down to the point that I say over and over again when I talk to people. You look at the majority, not the majority, all police action, shooting events happen because somebody wasn't doing as they were directed to do. If you think a police officer has falsely arrested you, the time to argue about it is not on the side of the road. The time to argue about it is to get your own attorney. And if you've truly had your rights violated, there are many attorneys that will be very anxious to take your case to court to make themselves rich and to make you rich as the person that was violated.
Yeah, and I would add, as well as Captain Burson's point, it gets to the third point I made, which is, are there situations where a body cam would perhaps be useful? Yes, but I fear that the public perception is that it would provide some panoramic view of the whatever's
Correct.
Occurring. IMPD had a pilot project with body cams, and I had the opportunity to see a couple of different situations where it had been used, and one in particular was domestic violence call, and the officer arrived, and he was standing, and everyone in the room was sitting, and because he was standing, you couldn't see any of the individuals who were sitting, and all you could hear was the screaming and yelling that was going on among the individuals there. But otherwise, the body cam itself, in and of itself, really showed nothing.
And it's a tool. It's like anything else, and it's going to be part of the case, but it obviously doesn't give the whole case, and it can't.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being in here. We've run out of time, but Prosecutor Curry, thank you for coming in here explaining about this, and we appreciate you being in here and being available.
Sure.
Captain Burson, thank you for coming on board.
Appreciate the invitation.
Again, you've been listening to the Indiana State Police Roadshow, brought to you by the Indiana State Police Alliance and Cops for Kids. We appreciate you listening each and every week, and we'll catch you next week on the Roadshow. Roadshow out.